Hey everyone, I'm Ian Douglas, the author of the website techinterview.guide. I do live streams every Sunday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern about topics relevant to interview preparation for the tech industry. I occasionally record longer Q&A sessions, and I've started to break those into smaller videos to post. And there'll be information at the end of this video about how to get in contact with me if you have additional questions. Let's get to it. Cool, so let's dive into that resume review real quick. Again, the person's in India, and I've scrolled the resume down enough that you won't see their name and their email and their phone number, and just kind of give you my thoughts on the resume. So as with all my resume reviews, I typically start them with opinions are like armpits. Everybody's got a couple, some of them stink. Don't ever listen to just my opinion. I've looked at probably 10,000 to 15,000 resumes over my career. I've looked at a lot of resumes. I have opinions on what makes a good resume. As a hiring manager, as a lead developer, when I'm going in to interview somebody, I want to be able to find information quickly on the resume. So I have thoughts and opinions on how to do that, but they're my thoughts and opinions. Go get lots of opinions. Go get lots of perspectives, and then figure out how you want to make your own resume. These are just my thoughts, kind of in sort of real time as we go. So let me switch over to that screen. All right. So as I mentioned, like off the top of the screen is basically their contact info. So I'm just kind of hiding that, and I'll be looking kind of away from the camera, just because that's where I've got it kind of pulled up. And so they've got their education up here, top left with links. So they were specifically asking, I want an internship. Was it an internship? They've been applying for internships at Google and Facebook. They do competitive programming. And they want to know, like, how can I make some changes in my resume to get selected? I can't guarantee that by making any of these changes, you're going to get selected by anybody. These are just my thoughts and opinions and what I know about certain companies. I will say certain companies really like education more than they like the skills that you have. So having the education up here in the top left, like right under your contact information, could really help. Pretty good GPA, 8.5 out of 10. What does that work out to in American GPA on like a 4-point scale? So like 8.5 divided by 2.5, it's like a 3.4-ish. I've heard from some people like don't even put the GPA on the resume unless it's 3.5 or higher, because again, some companies will bias against that. But they're going to look at this and go 8.5 out of 10, like that's 85%. That's okay. So yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with having the GPA on there. I would say if you really need the space on there, like remove it. So they've got an expected graduation date of August 2023, and they're going to school in India. They have a bachelor's in computer science from Bangalore, and then they've got like their GitHub link and LinkedIn and this Code Forces, which I think is the competitive programming that they do. It's like a 3.3 GPA. Yeah, and I mean, if that's the case, I would probably take the GPA off the resume. That would just be my thought. Okay, so let's talk about these headings. They've got education, links, coursework, skills, experience, but experience is like tiny compared to all of the other headings. And then down here, they got projects. They've got more empty space between this heading and Hack Earth than they do between like their last experience and their actual project work. They've got like a lot of sort of empty space in between these headings, but this one here feels really crammed together. So yeah, I would work on the overall like balance of how things are laid out a little bit. Also, these headings like projects and achievements, they're sort of left justified with the actual text on here, where this one up here, the experience one, seems to be indented a little bit. So yeah, I would make sure that that's the same font size, that it's not indented, and then just, make sure that the amount of sort of white space around those headings is kind of standardized across the page. They're kind of going right to the bottom of the page, so you don't want to push that too much. As far as like that bottom margin, you don't want to make it seem like you're going edge to edge and like right to the very bottom. But you've also got a lot of empty space here in between as well. So if you really needed the room, you could probably pull this whole right column over to the left a tiny bit if you did need the extra room. So that would be some thoughts there. Trash Devs has so many bolds. My eyes don't know where to go. I mean, all they've bolded is like the name of the school and some of the coursework that they've done, and then like the companies and stuff. So for me, the amount of bold is okay. What I don't like is the change in font. Like how they've written Bangalore is in a much thinner, like compressed font than any other text on the page. And then this project, like Journal, it looks like it's using that compressed font again and maybe a different size. On my screen, it's actually like a dark charcoal gray, where this is like dark, like pure black. And so like there's a lot of font change on here, and that actually gets tiring to read. So first thing I would do is I would come through, I would just highlight all of this stuff from education all the way down and just say like 10-point font, all of this stuff, make it the same font face on all of this stuff, and then go in and change just these headings to be, you know, a different font size. If you want to use a different font at that point, you can, but make everything the same font, everything the same font size, everything the same font color. And then if you want to add like a splash of color or like something stand out a little bit, then do the headings. But aside from that, like there's a lot of change going on here. And y'all know me, I hate this vertical bar as like a separator on here. I'm just not a fan of the vertical bar. Just put a comma or put white space in there, it doesn't matter. But that vertical bar is really interruptive to actually read, like from a psychological point of view. Your brain kind of goes, what's this? Oh, and then you keep reading. So yeah, I would typically remove those completely. MEB says the first point under his second experience is off as well. First, yeah, so the bullet points here don't exactly line up either. Like these bullet points line up, these bullet points line up, and then it kind of goes back. Like the bullet points for the projects line up with the bullet point from the first job experience, but these bullet points here are just slightly indented, just a tiny bit more. It feels petty to point that out. I will say, like, it feels weird to like point that out, but some people are going to look at this and go, something's off about this resume. They may not be able to articulate it. They may not be able to explain what they see as wrong or like what feels off, but it's going to feel off when they actually look at it. And they're like, no, something's not right about this resume. And some people will use that as enough bias to go, nah, I'm just going to pass on it. Like something's off about this, and they'll just pass on it. When we're looking at resumes, we're looking for a reason to say no. We got a lot of these to get through. And so the easier you can make things to read and the easier you can make things to find on the page, the more likely you're going to get that phone call. Again, nothing I say is going to guarantee that you get a phone call, but these would be things that I would coach somebody on. Camilo says maybe achievements should be bullet points instead of numbers. Yeah, so the achievements down here, they've numbered. So again, you're like kind of breaking that convention. Down here, it felt like you had to kind of go into like a multiple column format within the column in order to fit everything that you wanted. So you might want to change that up a little bit. I also thought it was kind of interesting too that this is I think the first time I've seen this on a resume where they're saying like, hey, for this programming language, I've written this many lines of code. I would be careful to know, like, are those actual lines of code, or is that just, you know, I did like a word count -L, like WC-L in Linux or Mac to get the number of lines in a file, and I just summed all that up, because that's also going to be white space and comments, and that doesn't count as lines of code. Plus 10,000 lines, to quote Mitch Hedberg, that's a really even number. Not that I would look for like an exact number, but like say like 10,000 plus, or, you know, put a tilde next to it, like about 10,000 lines or something like that. But I thought it was kind of an interesting sort of metric, because like I hate seeing like progress indicators like I'm a 4 out of 5 on Python. It's like, what does that even mean? Where here it's like, oh, you've actually written like quite a lot of C++ code. You've written a lot of Python code. Why isn't this one comma delimited like the first one? 10,000, you've got a comma in there. 5,000, 1,000, you don't. So again, you got to be consistent about this kind of stuff. Otherwise, people are looking at it going, something's off. Again, you're kind of putting multiple things together on this line where the other ones are kind of separate, like each one on a line. Also, I wouldn't typically put MySQL and MongoDB as programming skills. When I think of programming and you're listing all these languages, it's like, okay, these are the programming languages that you know. Down here where you're talking about other development, you're listing all the other tools. where you're also listing Firebase, which is a database. So why isn't Mongo and MySQL down here with Firebase, or why isn't Firebase up here with MySQL and Mongo? I would be more careful about how you're grouping these things together. You're giving me very high level, sort of like this is what I studied in school. I think you could probably remove some of this stuff because, yeah, you're going to computer science for school. I hope that you're taking algorithms and data and like data structures and things like that. Like these kinds of things don't need to be on the resume. Cloud computing, I mean, if you're learning that as part of your graduate studies, okay, but like which cloud? You don't list any of it down here in your skills. So are you doing AWS? Are you doing Azure? Are you doing Google Cloud? Are you doing Oracle Cloud? Are you doing Red Hat Cloud? Like there's a lot of cloud out there. Whose cloud are you using? Just be more specific about that. But yeah, I would take data structures, computer networking off. I would take analysis of algorithms. You could probably leave that one on. They would probably be curious like what you've actually learned about that. Cryptography, leave that on. Leave machine learning on. And again, you can reorganize this list because typically a hiring manager is going to look at this list and go, the things at the top are the most important things that I need to know about. So this tells me that you've put more emphasis on cryptography than you have on machine learning. But if you're applying for a machine learning job, put machine learning at the top of that list. Because anybody reading the resume is going, is this person machine learning? And they're going to kind of scan through and go, oh, look, machine learning. And so like definitely reorganize these things. To give you more room down here, I would shorten these lists. So the things to remove again, take data structures off, take computer networks off. Again, data structures you've repeated here, but that can also be taken away. Undergrad studies, like learning about operating systems is fine, but like I know from computer science that you're learning how the operating system works, but some people are going to look at that and go, okay, so you know how to use a Mac or you know how to use Windows, but that's not the same as like operating system development or like actually coding for an operating system, like kernel level kinds of things. So you may want to be a little more specific about this one. Database management, you could probably leave that on. Object-oriented programming, take that off. That's an expectation. Computer architecture, I would probably explain a little bit more maybe. System level programming is kind of the same as the operating system one, so I would leave one of them on and take the other one off. In this case, I would leave the system programming but get rid of the operating system one. And then Unix tools and scripting. I mean, if you've done like shell scripting, I would list that down here as a skill. Like you've done Bash or C shell or like whatever shell you've used or Z shell or whatever, list that down here, and then you can take this off. Like, yeah, you took a class on it, okay, but like, are you using it on a regular basis? If it's something that you're using on a regular basis, I would list that as a skill and not just a class you took. A lot of American resumes or for resumes for American companies, you wouldn't list all of your classes. You would just list a lot more about your skills. So it really depends on what kind of emphasis you want to put on your background for the employer. Do you want to sort of focus and point out the classes that you have taken? The other thing is you've got the education here where you're doing your master's degree until 2023. You're listing out the coursework for your master's, but is this current coursework? Is this coursework you've already taken, or is this everything that you're going to take until 2023? Because if you're getting if you want an internship now, but you haven't yet studied some of this stuff, get rid of it. Don't put it on a resume. Because if I'm looking for somebody that's done cryptography and you're like, oh, well, I actually don't take that class until next year, why is it on your resume? If you haven't actually learned it yet, if you can't talk about it in an interview, it should get taken off. If these are courses that you have taken so far, then leave them on. But just something to keep in mind there. MEB says, one bullet point on my resume wraps, I couldn't shorten it. The bullets on web and mobile are kind of scattered too compared to the other bullets, yeah. Like they really don't line up on here. And I get that they want to point out mobile development with React Native and Android, but you could list Android first, which would be much shorter, and then where this bullet point would kind of start, you could have like React Native, to kind of like go underneath these bullet points over here, and it wouldn't look so off. But I would also just say Android and just take the word development off of here. Like development's kind of a redundant term at this point. Also, grouping Firebase and Docker together is a little off because one's a database and one's a tool to actually deploy things in a container. So again, I would probably reduce the coursework that you're talking about and explain more about the actual skills that you have. So let's go look at the experience on here. So algorithm curator. So you're currently there. Curation of problems and writing editorials for algorithmic programming, hackathons, contests held on Hacker Earth. So be careful about the grammar. You've got a lot of pluralization on this line about what you're actually doing in this role. I think this is the competitive programming. I'm also not sure, like, is there supposed to be an extra E in here? Because it does look a little off to have an extra E in here. If that's the actual name, then that's fine. But if this is the competitive programming that you do, I would add that to the bullet point and say this is the competitive programming that you do. Curation of problems and writing editorials. So that makes me think that you're actually like building hackathons for this company. The way that I read this, it sounds like you're designing this event. Like this is part of your role, is that you design hackathon events by curating and collecting problems and writing editorials. If that's the case, I think this needs to be written a little bit more to say that you actually plan these events and this is a responsibility of planning that event. Because right now the way that it's kind of set up to read, it sounds a little disjointed as far as like what's the actual responsibility of the role. So I would look at that. Camilo asks, is this 1 page long? Yeah, it's all a 1 page resume. Aren't hackathons contests? It does seem a bit redundant. I mean, yeah, hackathons are usually contests, but sometimes they're just an event. You know, like, hey, we're just going to have this event and it's a hackathon and there's no prizes. You're just, you know, everybody get together and like form a team and work on some stuff. It certainly helps to motivate people when there's a contest and you're actually like giving money away or giving away prizes. I've been at hackathons that give away like thousands of dollars. For a while, I actually had heard of people like going to hackathons as their full-time job. Like they would literally hit a hackathon like every weekend. They would travel, like they would make enough money to like travel to hackathons around the country, compete for a weekend, win potentially thousands of dollars, and that was their income to then like, you know, go to the next hackathon. And in between hackathons, they're like leveling up their skills and they're getting really super competitive and figuring out ways to automate what they do. And then like try to plan like which hackathons am I going to and all that kind of stuff. So it can be lucrative if you are going to hackathons where they actually pay out prize money. But with COVID, I think a lot of the hackathons and a lot of those events really shut down. So, but if that is this role, like if you're planning these events and as part of that, these are the responsibilities, because this is already 2 lines, I would make 2 bullet points. The first bullet point is like responsible for coordinating or planning hackathon events held on this Hacker Earth website. In this case, you've actually spelled it out as Hacker Earth. Where up here, I think you're missing the R in Hacker Earth. So again, like just double check the spelling on that. So I would do that as the first bullet point, and then the second bullet point is like, what do you actually do for those events? And then that's where you could say like curate problems or curate like scenarios or something like that for the hackathons and writing editorials about algorithmic programming, something along those lines. Next one, undergrad research. You were there for a year, modeling and in vitro experimentation of drug delivery systems. You've got an extra space in front of this M, it looks like. It's indented slightly from where the A begins. Analyzed non-Darcy flow of blood in tumors by Monte Carlo simulations on C++ with random and non-random. So again, like this and is all like really crammed together. Random and non-random resistances in it. Interesting, okay. Not really like a little bit of software development, but I would probably take this one out. Like if you're presenting yourself as a software developer, this first bullet point, I would either put like second or just take it off completely. Unless you're going to like a pharmaceutical kind of company, but what they mentioned in the email is they're targeting Microsoft and Google, or Facebook and Google, apologies. Google is kind of trying to get into like the health system. If that's where you're applying for an internship, then you could keep this kind of stuff on here. But if you're just applying just to be a software developer or software intern at those companies that's not going to be part of the health group, I would probably take this first bullet point off, because it's not as important as like doing the C++ stuff. And I would probably start this whole line with like used C++ to simulate blah, blah, blah. So again, you're pointing out that, you know, I'm a developer, I use C++ to model this simulation. As opposed to like, I got to read the whole first sentence in order to see that you were programming it and using C++ for it. Teaching assistant for software engineering. Why is engineering a capital E? An IT workshop. Mentor students to help them get started with competitive programming. So because this is in the past, I would put this in the past tense. So you mentored students, and students would be a lowercase s. To help them get started with. I think there's an easier way that you could probably say this. Mentored students about competitive programming, or introduced and mentored students about competitive programming, or something like that. You could probably reduce it and just get it down to one line. So all of these were at the same school, I guess. So while you were getting your bachelor's degree, like all this stuff was going on. So you were also an intern there for 3 months, it looks like. Derive formulas, analyze data points, design and wrote backend APIs. You need a space after this comma. Created UI components using React.js. So it should be React.lowercase JS. So you got to make sure that you're spelling things right. Integrated the units. What is the units? Tested and deployed on production, all individually within 4 months. Kind of feels like you're missing a space in here, all individually. So yeah, again, just double check the spacing and the grammar. Again, this is where I would just highlight all the text on here and just say make everything the same font, everything the same font size, and make sure that there are spaces and so on where you expect them, and you remove them where you don't need them, just so it makes it a little easier to read. Developed an analytical dashboard from scratch using React.js, Node.js, MySQL, writing 150 plus backend APIs. That's a lot. Like 150 backend APIs? Like I would slap GraphQL in front of that, and now you've got one endpoint, and then, you know, write your queries or something like that. That would be a lot easier than building 150 API endpoints. That's a lot of endpoints. To say you were there in 3 months and you wrote 150 endpoints? As a hiring manager, I'm suspicious. Like you wrote in 3 months, you wrote 150 backend API endpoints and all of the work that they needed to do, plus 100 React components. That's 250 things in 12 weeks. That's 10 things per week, 10 plus per week. So that's several per day. That feels like a lot to me. Camilo asks in chat, shouldn't these be reversed, starting with position, location? Not necessarily. I mean, every resume is a little bit different. Like you can put the dates over on the right margin. You can move the location around wherever you want. How you design it and how you lay that out is really up to you. It's like I'm worried a lot less about the format as I am about like how are they presenting this content, because some of it's pretty wordy and some of it, like I said, I'm suspicious about this. Doing all of this in only a 3-month period, where when you get in there, you've got the whole ramp up of like, how do we do what we do? How do we work as a team? Like sometimes that can take a week or two. And then, you know, so let's call this 12 weeks, 10 weeks. In that 10 weeks, you wrote 250 things in 10 weeks. That's actually 25 per week. That's, if you work Monday to Friday, that's 5 things per day. 5 endpoints or React components or combination of them every single day, Monday to Friday for 10 weeks straight. I don't buy it. I'm a good programmer and I wouldn't be able to output that much. Like that's a lot, you know, and then to make sure that it's all like properly tested and, you know, all this kind of stuff. You also say within 4 months. So September, October, November, if it was like the full month of December, like, okay. So even 4 months. Well, now let's call it like 14, 15 weeks. Let's call it 15 weeks. 15 weeks, 250 things. That's still more than like a dozen things per week, right? I think my math is off. It feels like a lot of work. It feels like way more than one person would accomplish. If this was like team effort, yes, I would believe it. But tell me how big the team was. This would be something that as a hiring manager, I would be like, if I were to call you, I would be like, tell me about this. Tell me, like, was it literally the exact same thing and you were just like copying and pasting and like changing a couple things? Because then, yeah, I could see like where you're like kind of ramp up on some of that. But that feels like a lot of work to accomplish in 4 months of work. Yeah. BK the Awesome, thanks for the follow. Welcome to the chat. Wrote a handful of APIs in 1.5 years. Yeah. I mean, I've written like really busy API endpoints, but it would be like, you know, 1 or 2 like fully tested, fully scalable kinds of endpoints per day. But this person's on the you know, bordering on like 4 or 5 per day, Monday to Friday. Yeah, I'm not saying that they're lying on the resume, but it feels like it was either embellished or this was a group project and they were just talking about like as a group, this is what we did. But I don't buy that a single individual did that much work in that amount of time. Now, if they were working 7 days a week, okay, but then I'd be asking, why are you working 7 days a week? Excuse me. I remember to not breathe when I'm swallowing. All right, moving on. We got some project work. So I would say all of this work experience here is pretty relevant. Like I said, I would probably get rid of this one bullet point, but everything else on here definitely feels like programming. And so this work experience should definitely outweigh the project work that you've done. That said, you've got some project stuff on here where you're actually talking quite a lot about. I would probably reduce the text on these things a little bit. Now, the fact that this one you're using Google Cloud Vision API, you know, you're applying for a job at Google, so that's going to stand out to them. Facebook is also getting into a lot of VR, so that's going to stand out to them. So being able to use that kind of stuff, like definitely keep that project on here. I would almost promote this at the top of the resume so that as they're scanning this like really jumps out at them of like computer vision using Google Cloud. Because both companies are going to care about that kind of stuff. Again, it depends on what kind of department you want an internship in and whether the department's doing computer vision and you know, this kind of like API calls, if they're even doing internships. If they are, I would put this link right at the top, and this would be the first thing I talk about in a cover letter is this particular project. An Android app that gives you recipes based on the ingredients you have left over. And so this almost feels like it should be a separate bullet point. Ingredient input can be given manually or using image recognition. That's kind of cool. Helped write the back-end code in Java for API calls to Google Cloud Vision as well as the recipe API. So again, I think you're missing a space in here. Helped write the back-end code. So that makes it sound like this was a group project. So I would want to see on here like this was a group project or a group of 6 people or something like that. If this was a hackathon like Hack Illinois, it looks like. If this was a group project or a hackathon project, how many people were on the team? And then I like that you're calling out like your responsibility on the team. Like as part of this app, I didn't actually do the Android part, but I worked on the back end and this is the part that I built. I like actually seeing that on a resume. It points out, it sort of sets my expectation that if I were to go look at your GitHub and look for this code, I could verify that yes, that's where you contributed the code. Zooey says, in 3 months after school for code assessments for interviews. Oh, like building out API endpoints, yeah. Can't imagine doing it all the time on the daily. I mean, if that's your job, that's your job. You know, like, Zooey, if I were to hire you as a back-end developer, I mean, that's mostly what you're going to be doing. You're going to be building services, and you're going to be kind of following, like, hey, go build an API endpoint that takes this in as input, sends this back as output. The fact that this person's, like, new at this, you know, like, if this was their first internship doing this stuff while they were getting their computer science degree, let's say that it was a 4-year degree, they did this in 2019, so halfway through their bachelor's in computer science. I have a really hard time believing that this was all of their individual effort in 4 weeks. considering that they're undergraduate, doesn't mention anything at all about API development or service development, API development, doing front-end development with React and Node. They don't actually mention any of that here. So I have a really hard time believing this was individual effort. This would be enough for me to just pass on the resume and say, no, I'm not even going to call them, because it feels like such an outlier that it doesn't feel believable to me as a hiring manager. So, and then last one is Journal Launchpad. Is this supposed to be Launchpad, like LAUNCH pad? iOS app in Swift. Swift is a capital S. Again, make sure there's like good spacing. It puts up editable cards based on your location and the time spent at a particular location. So what I like to do with my projects is I like to write this out as like a user statement. Like users can, or like app allows users to track time spent at a location and create journal entries or something like that. Like, just tell me what the user does with this app. You're kind of explaining it, but it takes a minute for me to kind of piece it together and go, oh, it's a journaling app based on location. So like, make that much more concise. I would say like, if you can do that within like 10 to 15 words, that would be ideal. Like, user can write journal entries based on location. And that's all you need to tell me. Cards can be used to fill what was done, doesn't need to be capital F, at that location, and can be maintained at journal. I don't know what journal is. Is that like a separate service? Or are you like pushing this to like a external service or something? All cards are synced to Firebase, can be accessed by email and password using Google or Facebook login on any device. Okay, so you're doing Google and Facebook OAuth. So again, I would get these projects like up at the top of the resume, because you're using their APIs, you're using their OAuth, you're using their stuff. Get this stuff up at the top of like put it above your work experience in this case, because these are like really prominent. Either that or throw some bold on here, like Google Cloud, throw a bold on that, and then like throw a bold on like Google, Facebook, OAuth. But actually call it like OAuth on here. But yeah, I would say like some of this stuff is not written very clearly. I think maybe a little bit of help on like the grammar and the sentence structure of what it is these apps are actually doing, just so it kind of gets that point across a little bit more. As far as the achievements go, I think some of this could be compressed up, certainly. Like this line could be up above, up on this line. And then you've got this URL in here for Code Forces, which is this person's like competitive programming profile. But again, if you're going to put a link on here, like just make this like a clickable link, the same as you've done for like your GitHub and your LinkedIn up here, where these are links. But also, if you're going to have a link on here that's in a different color, make these links different colors as well. I would just verify that they're like, these are actual clickable links. I already tried them. But if this link is going to be bright blue, make these links bright blue, like keep some consistency on there. Ranked 150 in Code Forces programming contest. Out of 10,000. Yep. Cool. Anyway, those would kind of be my first things. So yeah, like BK the Awesome is like pointing out like, some of the spacing in here isn't good, like spacing between words and things like that. So again, just go through, highlight all this stuff, change the font, like make sure that there's only like a single space in between all the words, make it all the same size, make it all the same color, like standardize on all of that, and then go in afterward and then, make these headings like slightly bigger. Like if this is 10-point font, make these headings like 12-point font. If this is 10-point font, I would guess this is more like 14, and that takes up a lot of room. It doesn't need to be that big. But I would also, again, I would reduce the amount of like class work that you're actually talking about on the resume, make more room for the actual skills, because you're also mentioning a lot of stuff over here like Swift that you don't mention over here. It was an iOS development or an iOS app in Swift. You don't mention iOS at all. You mention Android and React Native, but React Native isn't going to be Swift. Or was that Swift on the back end? Like, because you can do like back end in Swift. So again, I think just more explanation around some of this. And then for things like React and Node, make sure it's like React.js and the JS is lowercase, Node.js, JS is lowercase. You mentioned Node over here, you mentioned React, but again, you don't have the dots in here. So yeah, just being a lot more consistent about that kind of stuff it will make a difference. Again, none of this is going to guarantee that you're going to get a phone call from Google or Facebook, but these are things that the recruiters are going to look at and they're like, eh. But I would definitely want to get some clarification around this point here. As a hiring manager, if this was submitted to me as an entry-level dev, I would look at that and go, I don't believe this, therefore I have a hard time believing a lot of other things on the resume. Like, that's enough to throw suspicion on your whole resume and make me just want to delete it outright, because you've put something on here that comes across as unbelievable, that a mid-degree, like middle of your degree time student who doesn't list any kind of experience before that or as part of your coursework that you've done API development, that you were able to build that much API development and front-end development in that amount of time. Just my opinion, just my thoughts on it. Cool. All right. Grammarly helped me a lot with spell check and other things. Yeah, for sure. I use Grammarly now as a plugin, and it's fantastic. Yeah, it's pretty great. I use it quite a lot. I guess it doesn't show up on the on OBS when I click it, but yeah, I use Grammarly like all the time now. It's pretty fantastic. Cool. Any other thoughts on this resume that anybody wants to share? Otherwise, I'll close it out and we'll kind of wrap that up there, and we'll get into like cover letter, or if other people just have other thoughts, questions, comments, funny stories, dad jokes. Happy to hear it. Otherwise, we'll move on from here. BK the Awesome says, I feel like it's overly crowded. Yes. And some people do that because there's so much content that they want to put on here. And again, I think if they remove some of the coursework stuff, or even just take all the coursework off, build up that skills block a lot more, I think it wouldn't feel as cramped. Also, with a single font size, like even like the font size of this text over here feels slightly bigger. Like if this is 10-point font, this is 9-point font, like visually to me, because I've got like a much bigger screen where I'm kind of blowing this thing up. There's a lot of font size, font style, font face, different shades of, black and white, and, this heading is in gray, this text is in gray, but these links are like kind of a charcoal color. Like this stuff is like really sort of spread out, where other text is really compacted. So yeah, I would revamp all of this from a layout and styling point of view, just to make sure that it's readable. But then yeah, get some kind of grammar tool, spell check, make sure that you're naming your technologies correctly and things like that. Move the links up into the header with the contact info. Yeah, I would typically as well. But in this case, they wanted to really highlight their education. Recruiters, if they're going to contact you, like I said, the email and the phone numbers up at the top, those are going to be the primary ways that they're going to contact you anyways. They're going to email you to set up a time, and then they're going to call that phone number. If they want to go look at your LinkedIn and your GitHub, like, it's usually the hiring manager that may do that. Maybe the recruiter will look at your LinkedIn. The recruiter may not even bother looking at your GitHub. But your hiring manager will probably be looking at your GitHub just to kind of see what's on there. So yeah. Line spacing is not consistent. Word spacing isn't consistent. Font colors are not consistent. Yeah, there's a lot in here for sure from that point. And like I said, it feels a little petty to point that kind of stuff out. And so I'm not doing it to kind of be a jerk. I'm just saying, though, like, some people are going to look at the resume and go, this looks off, and not be able to explain why, but they're going to feel like it's not right somehow, and they're just going to pass on it. So it's better to like really curate it and really lay it out well. And if you're going for that internship with Google and Facebook, I would personally move these projects up here to the very top and like slap some bold on the words Google and Facebook, so that it really points out to them, like, I really want an internship. I've actually built some projects with your tools. I think it'll really, really stand out. All right, cool. I think that'll wrap that. Hey, thanks for watching. I love helping people out with interview prep, and I hope this video helped you in some way. If you found this Q&A useful, please consider subscribing. You can follow me on Twitch as well for the live stream twice a week. Check out techinterview.guide/streaming for more information. I also have a daily email series that you can subscribe to on the website. There are never any ads, and when you finish the series, I scrub your information out of my database permanently. Finally, if you have a question that you'd like answered on the stream, you can find my contact info on techinterview.guide. I prefer LinkedIn or email. If you leave your question in a YouTube comment, it might take me longer to find it, but I'll see you next time.